Is the US planning an attack on Iran? Senior editor Paul Jay talks with Real News correspondent and writer Aijaz Ahmed. Based in New Delhi, Aijaz is Senior Editorial Consultant and political commentator for the Indian news magazine Frontline. He has taught political science and written widely on South Asia and the Middle East.
The question really has come down to, hasn't it, does Iran have the right to have an enrichment program? It's not really a question, do they have a right to have a bomb or nuclear energy? It really is, do they have a right to their own independent enrichment program or not?
You see, Paul, when the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, was being negotiated, what the non-possessing countries asked was, if we unilaterally give up our right to make such weapons, what are we going to get in return? And what the letter of the NPT says is not only that they have the sovereign right to pursue nuclear power enrichment for peaceful purposes, but beyond that, the NPT letter of the treaty calls upon the nuclear powers to help facilitate the development of nuclear energy in countries which have signed the NPT. India did not sign the NPT, but Iran did. For Iran, and what the Iranis said was that we sign it here to put ourselves under a treaty obligation that we shall not develop a weapon. But in return for that, we reserve the right to create our own enrichment program. And in fact, if you felt bound by the treaty, must facilitate and give us this technology. So far as the letter of the treaty is concerned, there are 3 points. They must commit themselves to not producing a weapon, which they have. They must commit themselves to inspections, which they have. But the quid pro quo is that they have the sovereign right to pursue enrichment for peaceful purposes. And in fact, the nuclear powers are obliged by the terms of that treaty to facilitate that program rather than obstruct it.
Is the election of Rafsanjani as head of the Advisory Council of Experts that oversees the Supreme Leader and picks a new Supreme Leader? Rafsanjani is usually considered to be more pragmatic, perhaps a little more understanding of the West. He's a businessman that has investments in the West. Is this a sign of perhaps a possible change in the Iranian position?
Rafsanjani was the president of Iran between 1979 and 1987. That is to say, he became the president a year after the revolution, handpicked by Ayatollah Khomeini. He has been a very, very powerful member of the clerical establishment from the very beginning. Secondly, Rafsanjani, when the revolution came, was a middle-class man with not much money. Today, he is the wealthiest man in Iran. His corruptions are fabulous. Thirdly, he ran against Ahmadinejad in June 2005 in the presidential elections. I do not know of a single media source which did not predict Rafsanjani winning comfortably. In fact, he lost to Ahmadinejad in a landslide victory for Ahmadinejad. He is already the president of the Expediency Council, which is one of the 3 main councils of the clerical establishment overseeing the government. Now he has got himself elected the president of the Assembly of Experts. So now he is president of 2 of the 3 important councils that overlook Iranian government. The Irani constitution, in fact, creates different centers of power. The government of the president is one center of power. These 3 councils are the other centers of power. My sense is that Rafsanjani is positioning himself to become the supreme leader after Ayatollah Khamenei passes away, and there is news to the effect that Ayatollah Khomeini is in fact very ill. And let me also add, Rafsanjani has always been the head of what I would call the collaborationist faction in the Irani clerical establishment, that is to say, the one most willing to collaborate with the United States. Having said all that, Rafsanjani is also an absolute opportunist and a corrupt man. He will do whatever is best for him and his faction. And in a very odd way, Rafsanjani's election might facilitate a situation in which he will negotiate on behalf of the totality of the Irani establishment with the United States terms on which Iran can avoid a war. My final point in all this is that Iran will try and avoid a war at all costs, short of compromising its sovereignty. So Rafsanjani, in a very peculiar way, is also the right person to negotiate with the Americans. Does his election mean that Americans will now feel more assured about Iran? I would say no. And I would take you back to the time when Ayatollah Khatami, who was a liberal man, a neoliberalizer in his economic policy, a reformist, who gave the most comprehensive formula for a settlement with the United States on all issues, including the nuclear issue. He was president when George Bush made that famous speech, The Axis of Evil speech, in which Iran was equated with Iraq, which has killed 1 million Iranians. In Iran, I would say that speech was decisive, and it is that speech which actually strengthened people like Ahmadinejad, because Iranis across the political spectrum were completely offended by that kind of speech. In other words, a person who was as good a friend as the United States has ever had, who was the president of Iran, makes an opening and he gets nothing. Rafsanjani remembers that, Ahmadinejad remembers that, every Irani remembers that. So Rafsanjani's election by itself is not that decisive, in my opinion.